Hey, it's Steph, and welcome to the Straight Up with Steph podcast, where we have real discussions around health and life and just trying to be better at both. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Straight Up with Steph. I'm Steph, your host, practicing dental hygienist and ergonomic specialist. Today, we're going to be talking about another one of my favorite ergonomic tools in dentistry. Last time, we talked about ergonomic loops. I will link that in the description below if you want to check that out. But today, we're going to talk about seating. And if any of you already follow me on social media, you probably know what I'm going to say. Yes, we're talking about saddle stools today. Using a saddle stool can help reduce your pain, whether that be hip pain, neck pain, back pain, and it can really help with our positioning in the operatory as well. So if you've been curious about saddles, if you want to see what all the fuss is about, this episode is for you. Saddle stools are not a new thing. They've actually been around for quite a while, but they aren't the norm. And I really wish that they should be, because they are huge when we're talking about taking care of our body. And it really makes it much easier for us to move around in the operatory and get close to our patient. Today, we're going to talk about traditional chairs, go over some features of those and why I think that they aren't the best option for us practicing dentistry. Then we'll talk about saddle stools and why I think these are far superior and a much better option for us working chairside. I'll talk about how to adjust your stool. I'll go over why I like saddle stools so much. And then we'll go over what to look for when you're looking for a saddle stool, and also some alternatives if you know that you cannot tolerate a saddle. I also want to highlight how to adjust them. I posted a couple how-to videos recently on saddle stools. I'll link those down in the description below. But it's come to my attention that some people are using saddles, which is great, but they might not know how to adjust them properly. Before we get into the differences of traditional stools versus saddle stools, I want to talk about how we should adjust our stool, whether that be a traditional or a saddle. The rules are pretty much the same, whether we're talking about a traditional stool or a saddle stool as far as adjustments. When you first sit down on the stool, you want to make sure that you're sat all the way back in the chair so that you feel the backrest against your back. I understand not all stools have backrests on them like saddle stools, but this is a tip if you have a backrest. You have that backrest, you want to feel that backrest against your back. It's there for a reason. Our spine has curves in it, and those curves are there for a reason. And a lot of times when people start to experience back pain, like upper or low back pain, it's because these curves are starting to flatten out, which we don't want. So we want those curves to be like curvy, especially the low back curve. So the backrest, when it's pressed up against the low back, it kind of reinforces that curve, which is what we want. So make sure you're sat all the way back in the chair and feel that backrest against your back. Now let's talk about the seat pan. So the seat pan is the part of the chair that your butt sits on. So you've got your seat pan here and the backrest here. If you're just listening to this podcast and not watching it, I'm just doing a little demo where you've got like a flat line for the seat pan and then a vertical line for the backrest. You actually want that seat pan tipped forward a little bit. Not so much that you feel like you're going to slide out of the chair or that makes you feel unstable, but really it's a tiny little tilt, just a few degrees. What this does is it opens up the angle of the hips, which is what we want. We have a lot of problems because we're sitting for a long time. By the way, I do recommend standing at least half the time if you can, but our hip flexors get really tight when we're sitting, and tight hips directly translates to low back issues. So if we can tip the seat pan forward just a little bit, it's going to open up that hip angle, which relieves pressure on the hips, and it also relieves pressure in the low back and kind of forces that curve to stay there, which is good. Another adjustment is the height, and this is also going to help the hips. But you want the stool to be high enough to allow your hips to be above your knees. Let me tell you how I was taught in hygiene school. Granted, this was a long time ago, but it's still being taught today, and I'm not quite sure why. I was taught, and I learned on a traditional stool, I was taught to have my thighs parallel to the floor with a 90-degree angle between my torso and my legs. This is not the best way to sit. It causes extreme hip tightness, especially if we're leaning forward, right? So we've already got that 90-degree angle, and then we're making that angle even more acute by leaning forward. That's really going to cause a lot of hip tightness, which then causes back issues. So you want your hips to be above your knees, whether you're using a traditional stool or a saddle stool. I have found that it's much easier to get your hips above your knees in a saddle stool versus a traditional stool. So that's one of the reasons why I like saddles so much. Once you've got your height adjusted, then you want to think about your feet. You want your feet flat on the floor. You don't want them crossed. You don't want your legs crossed or your ankles crossed. You don't want one foot on the ground and one foot up on the caster of the stool, okay? You want them flat on the floor because your legs can really help you with stability. When we're sitting, you don't want all of your weight sitting in your butt. That's going to cause a lot of pressure in the lumbar spine. You actually want some of the weight to be in your legs too. So you want to think of your two legs and your butt like a tripod. And you want the weight evenly distributed between your two legs and your butt. Now that we know how to adjust our stool, let's talk about the differences between traditional stools and saddle stools. Traditional stools are the ones that you see most of the time in dental practices. It's got that flat seat pan. Sometimes there's a little contour to it, but it's pretty much flat. And then you have the backrest. That's a traditional dental stool. I have seen some newer traditional dental stools, which are a little bit better than the old ones, but I personally still haven't ran across one that I would recommend as much as I recommend a saddle stool. The reason for that is it's forcing us into that 90-degree hip angle, which isn't good. And if you're on the taller side, especially, I know petite clinicians probably struggle with this too, but when you're sitting on a traditional stool, you've got your legs jutting out in front of you, right? There's nowhere else for them to go. They're just right in front of you. What happens when we try to get close to the patient chair? Our legs are bumping into the patient chair. And I'm on the taller side. I'm 5'9". So this was a huge problem for me when I was using my traditional stool. I would try to get close to the patient chair. My legs would literally get in the way, bumping into that patient chair. So I either was forced to spread eagle my legs, which is not good for the hips, or I had to keep my legs pointed up towards the head of the patient, and then I was doing a twist to try to work on my patient. Neither of those are good solutions. And when we've got that 90-degree angle, it causes that extreme hip tightness that I already mentioned. When the hip flexors are really tight like that, it not only causes pain in the hips and the low back, it causes reduced range of motion in the hip joint, which isn't good. And it can cause pain in the groin as well. Those are some of the issues that I have with traditional dental stools. Now let's talk about saddle stools. Have you ever seen or used a saddle stool? If not, the seat is designed very similar to that of an actual horse saddle, hence the name. Some of them really resemble a horse saddle, but there's a lot of different variations with it now. If you imagine someone sitting on a horse, they've got great posture because their legs are out to the side. They're not jutting out in front of them. They're nice and relaxed, and they're hanging down the side of the horse. This gives them a lot of stability. They have great posture. Their hips are nice and relaxed, and they're very stable on the horse. The concept is the same for us using them in dentistry. This is a much more natural and healthy way for us to sit, and it really helps our back. I don't think it's a natural position to have our legs jutting out in front of us. It's much more natural to have them off to the side. And sitting this way, especially when you've got your stool adjusted correctly, really supports those curves all the way up to your neck, but it supports the whole spine when you're sitting. In a saddle stool, as far as the height goes, you want to be almost like you're in a halfway sitting to standing position. That's how high you want the saddle to be. And that's where some of the people, when they were commenting on my video that I just did, they're like, oh my gosh, I've been using this totally wrong. It's way too low. My legs are perpendicular to the floor. Once you raise them up, it's a completely different experience. You'll just have to kind of see it to believe it, but it makes all the difference. Let's talk about how you can go about purchasing a saddle stool. I'm going to give you my unpopular opinion, which is I do not recommend cheap saddle stools on Amazon. I get asked for links for those almost on a daily basis, and I refuse to do that because I do not think that this is the best option for us. We really use our bodies a lot in dentistry, and we demand a lot from our stool. We want to make sure that that stool is made with really high quality products. It's not made with like a plastic base that's going to fall apart in a year, and that it's customized to us. If you think of all of the different pairs of pants out there and sizes, the size that fits me likely isn't going to fit you. And it's the same with a saddle stool. They are very individualized. And I'm going to give you a checklist of things here in a little bit that you can write down or save this video for when you talk to a rep, because they're going to want to know these things about you. We want to make sure that we're using a stool that is customized to fit us. If you think of how long you're sitting on a stool all day, for some of us, that's 8 to 10 hours. Hopefully it's a little bit less because I do want people to be standing more. Even so, that's still a lot of hours at the end of the week, month, year. If we're sitting on something that isn't supporting us, that doesn't fit us, it could potentially cause issues for us that weren't going to happen in the first place. I'm a big believer in investing in a quality saddle stool from a reputable brand. If you have questions on brands, please put them in the comments and I'd be happy to get back to you. This is an investment. It shouldn't be something that costs $50 or $100. This is something that can really help support us over time and reduce our pain, increase our energy, and really prolong our longevity in the operatory. I'm going to give you 5 stats. These are 5 things that you want to let your rep know when you start talking about saddle stools. Your hip flexibility. Some of us are more mobile than others. Your torso size, whether you have a long or short torso. Your pelvic width, wide or narrow hips. Your inseam, and your height. The inseam and height really matter because the rep is going to need to know what kind of cylinder to put on the stool. A smaller cylinder is good for people who are more petite. If you're taller like me at 5'9", I need a taller cylinder. I hear so much from people that they're using a saddle stool that their office has, which is great, but the cylinder is tiny and they're 5'9" or taller. That's not a good stool for them. Or some clinicians who are really petite and they're forced to sit on a saddle stool that is really spreading their legs way too far because they don't have a wide pelvis. That's what I mean is these saddle stools are very individualized. And I think a lot of the complaints that I hear from people that they hate saddles or they can't tolerate a saddle, maybe that's true, but also have they tried one that actually fits them? Like, I don't know. There is a small subset of people who cannot tolerate a saddle stool. Remember earlier when I said the lumbar curve is really important and saddle stools help to reinforce that lumbar curve? If someone has excessive curvature of that lumbar curve, that's called lordosis. And a lot of times when people have this, they know that they have it. But when they sit on a saddle stool, because it's really accentuating that curve, they don't need to accentuate that curve because it's already too accentuated and it just doesn't feel good for them. Same with tipping the seat pan forward. It might not feel good for them to tip that seat pan forward because, again, it really accentuates the curve in the low back. If you do have lordosis or if you've tried saddle stools and you just cannot tolerate them and you know that you've tried one that should fit you, there's a stool that I've seen that resembles a traditional stool, but the seat is different. The seat pan is different. It's a triangular seat. It's almost like a bike seat. So that when you sit on it, your legs are still out to the side, not out in front of you, off to the side. You can still mess with the seat pan. It's got a really nice lumbar support as well. So I'm going to link that company down in the comments too for you. And I've said it a couple times, I think, is the importance of standing. I do recommend standing. As much as I love saddle stools, I don't think it's good for us to sit all day long. When we're standing, we are using different muscles than we would be if we're sitting. We're increasing blood flow and our legs aren't in the way, so we're able to get really close to the patient. For standing, I recommend standing at least 50% of the time anyway, but especially if you have a patient who is pregnant, who can't lean back in the chair for vertigo reasons or COPD or something, spinal fusions, whatever, or who is more full-bodied. You're more apt to have better posture in those situations when you're standing than if you're sitting. For me, with my clients and what I recommend in my courses is to stand for procedures that you don't need the foot pedal for. There are some people who are like magicians who can just use the foot pedal when they're standing and have no problem. I'm not one of those. I'm very clumsy and I just feel really unbalanced. If you can do it and you don't experience any pain or hip pain, go for it. But for the most part, I recommend standing, like if you're a hygienist, I recommend standing for injections, doing your IOEO, doing perio charting, hand scaling. You can stand for all of those, flossing, and then sitting for things that you need the foot pedal for, like using your power scaler and then using your polisher. Although there are some cordless polishers out there, I use one, and there are some that you don't even need the foot pedal for, so you could stand for that as well. The more often we're switching it up between standing and sitting, that is going to make a world of difference for your pain and your energy. Another benefit of standing is you do burn more calories when you're standing. So if you want to burn more calories during the day, try to alternate sitting and standing. So that's all I have for you today on saddle stools. If you have more questions that I didn't answer, please put them in the comments. If you're on YouTube, send me a DM. I read everything and I will get back to you. If you're finding this content helpful, please subscribe to my channel, follow my show, leave me a review. I would really appreciate it. Thanks for being here and I'll talk to you soon.